just been asked by the scariest professor in the college to give a very short presentation and turn in a brief write-up of an issue. To make matters worse, the professor has given you the topic of global warming. The only thing you know about global warming is the handful of comments you've read on Twitter or on random sites online or as taglines on cute pictures of polar bears on Facebook. Scariest of all, the professor recently failed your friend when he finished his own presentation and gave him a big lecture. The professor claimed that your friend used someone else's material and that he did something called plagiarizing. You're scared. You don't want to get into trouble. You want to do the right thing. But how? Well, just what the heck is plagiarism anyway? Plagiarism takes place when a writer or speaker uses someone else's words or ideas without giving credit to the source. The basic idea here is that when you find words or ideas online or in a book, you need to let the professor and reader know where you found the information. Here is part of what your friend turned in for his assignment. Global warming is a big problem. The world's 6.5 billion people pump into the Earth's atmosphere twice the amount of carbon dioxide than the world's forests and oceans can naturally absorb. The remaining carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere and traps heat in a phenomenon known as the greenhouse effect. Well, so what's the problem? Well, the professor asked how your friend knew that the amount of carbon dioxide was double what the Earth can absorb. Your friend did not know. He told the professor that these were his own words, but that he did his research online. All right, let's look again at the passage and figure out what the problem is. Well, the first sentence was written by your friend. The underlined portion was actually copied and pasted from an article written by Patrick Gonzalez. Your friend simply took Gonzalez's words and put them into his article. Big mistake. Well, at least you know what plagiarism means, but how can you avoid it? You're supposed to do research on global warming. You know very little about it. That professor is certainly making you warm right now, but what can you do? Why can't you just grab an online research article and use it? Is using another source always theft or plagiarism? The answer is more complicated than you might imagine. It's not always so simple as shamelessly stealing somebody else's work. But before we explore the forms of plagiarism in more depth, let's be clear about why you should care about plagiarism. It's not just an issue for evil college professors. Plagiarism is important for several reasons, and we'll look at just a few. Number one, yes, you do want to avoid getting into trouble with the shadowy professor. You need to get a good grade and get credit for the assignment. Your future career depends on your completing your education. And plagiarism is a serious issue of academic dishonesty and misconduct. Number two, theft. Your friend did not write some of the words he used in his assignment. The person who did the hard work of writing was Patrick Gonzalez. Gonzalez also allowed his work to be published online. This takes a great deal of effort. You probably worked hard for your car or your phone. Imagine if someone took it from you and used it without your permission. The thief or borrower did not ask you and did not work at all to pay for the object. That's pretty terrible, right? Number three, credibility. It's important to use your own ideas and explanations in your writing. However, it's very useful and often necessary to bring in outside experts or sources to help you make a point. I mean, you don't know how much sea ice has melted or if it has melted at all. The author we mentioned earlier, Patrick Gonzalez, has this information. You can use his words if you give him credit. When you do this correctly, your writing begins to sound more believable because you're not relying solely on your own thoughts. Okay, there are two basic kinds of plagiarism: intentional and unintentional. Intentional plagiarism is unfortunately what your friend did. He copied and pasted someone else's work into his project. When asked about it, he told the professor that the words were his own. He knew what he was doing was dishonest by using Gonzalez's work to improve his own writing. That's pretty cut and dried. Unintentional plagiarism is when you use someone's words and do not properly give credit or are unaware of how to correctly bring in an outside source. The good news here is that you will learn about how to effectively handle sources in your college courses. Mind you, if you get it wrong, it's still considered plagiarism and has to be fixed. But this doesn't involve being dishonest or trying to cheat. Even the mean old professor will probably help you sort this out if you ask early in the semester for help. Avoiding plagiarism. You've found several sources for your project and plan to use them in your presentation and as part of the written portion of the assignment. You know enough about plagiarism to know that you must give an author credit. This is where things can get tricky. There are essentially 3 ways to research material to avoid plagiarism. Method number 1, summary. You have found a great passage from a source that covers some of the material you want to have in your presentation. However, the passage is very long and you do not want to have to put the entire passage in a quote. You definitely do not want to plagiarize. A summary might be a good option for you. A summary is a short restatement of material in your own words. It should be much shorter than the actual material being used. For example, a summary of an entire chapter can often be summarized in about a paragraph. The goal of a summary is to mention all the main points so the reader has a general idea about the material without getting into all the details. The idea here is to put the material in your own words and give credit to the source. Let's look at a simple example. The following material is from Mary Lou Considine's Climate Change Will Force the Relocation of Animal Species. Now let's look at a possible summary. Note that the summary is much shorter and gives the author credit at the end. It also does not use the language from the source. One way of doing a summary is to pretend you're explaining to a friend what the source was about and you only have 1 minute to do it. The key is to put the material in your own words and then give credit to the author. Method 2, paraphrase. A second tool for handling material and avoiding the perils of plagiarism is to paraphrase. It's very similar to a summary. However, the length of paraphrase does not need to be shorter than the original source. Again, you need to put the author's ideas into your own words, but also give credit to the author. Do not copy the structure or wording of the source. Let's look at another example from Mary Lou Considine's Climate Change Will Force the Relocation of Animal Species. Now let's look at one possible paraphrase. Notice that the paraphrase captures the meaning of the material, but does not use the structure or the words of the source. Method number 3, quotation. Perhaps the simplest way to avoid the ire of your professor and his wrath is to simply quote a source. We'll go into the specifics of how to quote in depth later, but the process for now is relatively simple. All you have to do is to introduce the author and then state the quote. Consider this example from Fred Warmington's Warming Up the Orb. Here's one way to quote the author effectively. Note that the author is introduced in the sentence. This gives the credit to the author and keeps your project safe from being accused of plagiarism.
Well, Oscar Wilde once wrote, "There is no sin except stupidity." That may or may not be true, but one thing is certain. Plagiarism is stupid. You steal someone else's work, which leaves you stupid, and you stupidly assume you won't get caught. The truth is, there's a whole lot of tools out there to combat plagiarism. You will be busted. You can also no longer claim ignorance of what constitutes plagiarism thanks to this video. Your professors never believe that excuse anyway. There are also consequences. You may flunk your class, get kicked out of school, be publicly shamed, get sued, or lose your job. Don't join the growing wall of plagiarism shame.